This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast, where the pledges are all made up and clarity doesn't matter. I'm your host Pooka, and joining me this evening is Fetch. Fetch, how goes the struggle?
We're working our way through the thorns, but I'm sure we'll find a gateway soon.
You say that, and yet I know now, from doing this close read, that the length of time one spends in the hedge is directly a factor in determining how many successes you will need to escape. So I feel like we've been in here for a while.
A tragic truth, and we may be here for a little while longer because our two-parter is turning into a three-parter now.
Shh, don't spoil it. But yes. Yes, thus continueth our deep read-through of the first edition Changeling the Lost Corebook, this tome that I'm starting to suspect might be like longer than any single book in Changeling the Dreaming.
What?
Maybe not longer than C20 in terms of word count, but everything else, I feel like it outpaces them just because the text is so dense and there is comparatively little art next to like dreaming books. Yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot to get through.
I'm gonna have to at some point compare that. Today we are talking about the special rules and systems and storytelling.
Yes, chapters 3 and 4, which, despite just being 2 chapters, clocks in at something like 115 pages. So
You really get your money's worth out of the page count, if nothing else, in this book.
True. Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, I know we've talked before about the planned limited seriesness of this line, and I wonder if that factored into the way they structured this. Like, it really does feel like it carries an entire game line within its covers.
I could see that being a part of it. I will say that there is a small problem that we've elided over throughout the course of this, but which may become very noticeable to anybody who's actually reading the book for the first time. You will read content that's in chapter 1 and then reiterated in different forms later on in the book, which feels like a questionable editing choice to me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm reading the thing, then I'm rereading the thing, then I'm rereading the thing. On the other hand, it does make it easier to introduce a lot of these very complex ideas at a pace that the reader can digest. Much like we're pacing out these recordings, I think it's a good idea if the reader paces out their reading.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I've said I read it cover to cover in one go, but I also had 10 hours and nothing else to do, so that was not a typical situation, I think.
Shall we
So,
jump into the special rules?
let's do it. So, chapter 3. The opening story here is, it took me a minute to figure out the situation. I think it's...
I still don't get it. What's going on?
Okay, at first I thought it was a phone call, and then I thought it was an inner monologue. I think it's a one-sided dialogue. It's someone talking to another person who's live, but it's just their side of the conversation or something.
Oh.
I think.
Okay. That still does not explain the cover image, which is amazing, but wow.
I think this is the speaker of the opening story's person that they're talking to being attended to by the person they're talking about, if I'm putting it together correctly.
I'll give a content warning. If anybody here has arachnophobia or other fear
Yeah.
of insects, you should prepare yourself when you look at this image. Beautifully done. Very gross.
Page 170, if you need to skip it. So, yes, special rules and systems. So this is the chapter where we have all of the sort of bespoke changeling, fancy mechanical whatnots. And I think we're probably not really going to get into the nitty gritty of the mechanics for every single piece here because there's a ton of it. But I mean, I commend them on really trying to think through all of the dice rolls that you'll need, glamour expenditures you'll have to think about, possible willpower things. And it really seems as though a lot of these systems were play tested within an inch of their lives. I hope, at least. I know that's a rarity for White Wolf materials, but
I think if nothing else, they certainly put a lot of effort into thinking through what they've got here.
yeah,
We could jump into Mask and Mean, which is the first system that we've got.
indeed. The way that the mean and the mask are discussed here, it is a little different from dreaming, and that the mask is wholly an illusion of humanity over the now true mean. That is their self, the changeling self. So although the mask resembles their old form, their old human self, although slightly fey touched with like their height might be a little different, their skin might look a little bit different, you actually have to spend glamour to see the mask. It's not like what you automatically perceive in other changelings. To each other, the mean is the truth. And that differs from changeling, where both are kind of true in a way, the human self and the fey self. So that distinction is something which stood out to me right from the start here.
For readers who are coming from Changing the Dreaming or who may later be looking at Dreaming for the first time, in that game, they don't have the term mean and mask. They have fey mean, and I believe the other term is mortal mean. Is that correct?
It's, well, for added confusion, it's actually mortal seeming.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Cut to Fetch throwing hands in
Oh.
the air and scattering papers everywhere.
Oh
Yeah,
boy.
I mean, they really did do a number with like reusing terms with different meanings for this, but
It's also worth noting that although the mask still looks human, that as you become more powerful, more of your Arcadian nature bleeds through the mask, revealing
mhm.
itself to humanity in ever subtle but more noticeable ways. Like people might say, whenever they come in here, God, it feels like the temperature really goes up. And no surprise, they're a summer courtier whose hair is made of fire.
Go figure. And I like that. I like that as a subtle sort of narrative trick you can do. I would also say I feel like this is one of the sections which, especially when you get into the hedge spun clothing that replaces voile in dreaming terms, this is a point where I feel like people point to Lost as being, quote, better than Dreaming, or at least offering more opportunity for customization in terms of what you can do with your appearance and deciding how mask and mean kind of inform each other. Then people have, especially in C20, I find, ported that idea back into Dreaming as though it was never an option before. I would like to state for the record that I think that's always been possible in Dreaming. So
Do
I'm
you
not
mean to
sure.
have like a very wild mean, something that's
Yeah, I mean,
shockingly inhuman?
I think that people read more fixity into the descriptions of the kiths in Dreaming than the actual text has, if that makes sense. And maybe that's because the art direction pointed people towards certain ideas, or people just went with the examples that were in the books that maybe didn't vary as much as the text suggested you could. Meh.
That's a fair concern. The thing I note is that your mean does and does not have a significant impact upon what your character is capable of. You can say whatever you like about your character. You can say their hair's made of fire. They literally do not have a heart in their chest. They're made of clockwork. They're forever stuck looking like a teenager. None of those things have a mechanical effect upon the game unless it either comes out of your seeming, your kith, or returning to seeming in a way that we skipped over previously. You do get a specialty in something to, I think it's raw athletics or one other, or weaponry maybe?
Stealth.
Yeah, to cover ways that your mean has changed you in subtle ways.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically, there really isn't much. It is all very narrative and cosmetic. And I think because of that, I've always felt, well, yeah, of course you can do whatever you want in terms of your appearance and dreaming. You're not really impacting anything. I think it's when people kind of want to get the benefits of merits without actually spending points on them. It gets complicated. But I don't know. It was just something I was thinking about while reading through this.
I think that would be a great thing to cover when we talk about what can we take from
Hmm.
Lost to apply to dreaming, even if the answer is, It's still in dreaming, just look harder.
Yeah.
We should talk about disrupting the mask.
Yes, I was about to say the mechanical points that are worth saying are you can spend 1 glamour to fortify the mask, thereby hiding your mean, and other changelings will only see your human mask. You can spend all the glamour in your pool, however much it is, to drop the mask entirely. So, similar to calling on weird, everybody around you sees you for your true Fey self. And then, if you do that, to re raise it, you have to acquire 2 glamour and immediately spend 1 of them. My understanding, though, and maybe I just kind of missed this somewhere, there's not really a particular benefit to dropping the mask in the same way as calling on the weird, correct? Like there's no mechanical something.
Good question. So the only benefit to dropping the mask in CTL 1E is that narratively it lets people see you for who you truly are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something which may be invaluable to some changelings. It can also be used as a gimmick. There's a story in one of the later books where a minotaur makes the terrible decision to do that and go to a Halloween party. It's like, that's cool. I just look like myself. And then something bad happens. It's like, oh no, I have no glamour. I didn't think this through. But it can be important if you're, say, I have loved ones and they've welcomed me back, but they don't get why I'm strange. Let me show them. In 2E, they will change it so that it is more like invoking the weird, where,
Right.
for example, you can just get an exceptional success by doing it. I think it's also worth noting that strengthening the mask is part of a bigger thing that changing the loss involves some paranoia, spycraft, and politicking. So it's not unusual for changelings to use strengthening the mask or contracts like skin mask or riddle kith in order to alter their appearance so they can do some things and get away with it without being recognized by their fellow losts, which I think goes great with the game's themes.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add on mean and mask? I think we've covered everything.
I think so. It's one of the shorter sections in this chapter, as is the next one on damage and healing.
Oh,
Mostly
yeah.
because it functions just like with mortals.
Yeah, you can skip most of this when you're reading
Yeah.
it because it works the same. Just with, I appreciate that there's a few notes where they're clarifying that yes, it does work the same. Although, if you want to say recover from damage, keep in mind changelings do have magic, and you could always find something in the hedge to help you out.
Healing fruits. Fruits just filled with antibiotics.
It's true. Oh, scars and wounds. I forgot about this. That they go a little bit epic with this, where if you
this is cool.
get hurt, you always get hurt in a way that looks cool.
Or at least story-worthy.
Story, yes. There is one big exception to damage and healing. Are we ready to get into the big one?
Well, so here's the thing. Yes, I assume we're talking about cold iron.
Oh, yeah.
But interestingly, so cold iron, it's not the same as dreaming in the sense of it. I mean, there's no banality to worry about, obviously, and there's no aggravated damage for changelings in particular. The true Fae will suffer aggravated damage from cold iron. But what you do have to deal with is that you don't get any protection from Fey powers, and you can't use Fey powers against things protected by it. So it does seem to kind of dissipate contracts and other forms of Fey trickery.
It does. I've not had this come up in a game of mine, but your character is a titan who summons the powers of the wind to protect them, then it doesn't really help against cold iron.
That wrought iron fence is going to just stay where it is.
Oddly, they do not explicitly say here that you cannot affect iron.
Yeah, they're even somehow more nebulous about what counts as cold iron than any like C20 or whatever else.
Are they? They say iron forged only by hand without fire.
I guess so.
Making sure I'm not missing something on here.
It says the most damaging iron has been hammered into its shape with nothing but muscle, a hammer, and patience. Yeah, that is actually, I guess, more restrictive. And not usually what people mean when they say cold iron, because usually at least some heat is involved. But
There's more discussion of this in a later book, so we can
aha,
probably leave it there for now. I think I had one other note, which is to say, I find the idea of cold iron as a common weakness odd in Changing the Lost. I get that it's a
hmm,
common the Fae are weak to cold iron, but that kind of made more sense when they were in a vaguely Eurocentric pulling from the most common weakness thing. But in Lost, the Fae are from the beginning of the game line a global phenomenon, and they already have the concept of frailties built into them. So I get they justify it, but it's always seemed odd to me to try to fit everything under the umbrella of cold iron for this game.
my twin response to that, and I'm not saying this as a cold iron apologist or anything, but I would say that despite the Fae being a global phenomenon, the game does still code to me as being Euro/Anglo pointed. And at the same time, if they are a global phenomenon, then iron is as good as anything else, I would say. I mean, the explanation that they give is sort of straight out of Dark Ages Fae, like, oh, this is because of a violated oath from long ago. And fine. Could have been wood, could have been silver for, reasons, could have been gold, could have been any material. But I guess I don't mind it. I know there's a lot of scuttlebutt around it, but I'm like, yeah, whatever.
That's a good point. Shall we talk about longevity and decrepitude?
There's not much to say. I expected there to be more, to be honest.
Really? Okay.
Well, in particular, because time and messing with time is something that is so significant to a lot of the stories of a lot of changelings. And I mean, I guess ultimately it doesn't impact gameplay that much necessarily. But yeah, I don't know. I just expected more. The gist of it is just increase weird, your lifespan gets extended, and you get a bonus against infirmity.
Yes,
Hooray.
you can live to be about 200 years old if you hit Weird 10. And the bonuses that you get for this mean that you could be 195 years old at Weird 10 and be as hale and hearty as you were in your,
Yeah.
when you were actually like 25.
You don't look a day over 96. I do like that they have this caution about if you do get that old and your weird goes down, then the decrepitude
Oh,
kicks
yeah.
in, which is a nice tie to folklore around like Oshin and the children of Lear from Irish mythology.
There are ways of the Fae extending their life, but I don't know if they ever talk about it explicitly. And I have thoughts on that, but that is getting kind of off topic for this episode. And we have not even gotten to pledges yet.
All right, let's talk about this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so this is outright a mini game in and of itself. It's the first of three that I'm going to be mentioning this recording, because you could put massive work into designing these. I don't think you have to necessarily. I can't even recall if any of the games I was in we ever dealt with making a pledge. Like there were characters who had pledges, but I don't think we ever went through the process of designing one. I like that as a service the Lost could provide for each other, but I would say this is maybe one of the more successful examples of a thing that dreaming players wanted, in this case, mechanics around oaths, that Lost provided a lot more than they needed to, but it worked. It's solid. There are a lot of really wiggly specific mechanics throughout here, so I just kind of want to give a broad overview, but I do like this system. I am curious what your experience has been using them in a game.
My experience has been limited to second edition, which
Sure.
took this system and revised it significantly. The thing that came up most often for me is sealing pledges, people making modest promises, which is not an easy part of the 1E system.
Hmm.
There's a formality about it. I've had the idea of the big pledges, like the ones that you make to the freehold, as a background element. And I like the idea of these major pledges that everybody agrees to that have presumably written down rules somewhere of how people are expected to conduct themselves. But I feel like you can keep that as a background element for most of the game.
Hmm.
Or if you find there's something that you're very excited about, you can choose to make it the focus of the game. I actually take this back. We did have a Motley Oath come up in 2E, which was similar to the way pledge crafting works here. And in that situation, the group were just a bunch of high schoolers who kind of knew each other and were working through things. And a defining moment of that game was when they trusted each other enough that they made a motley oath and bound themselves together.
Nice.
The funny thing is, the players didn't really care about the mechanical benefits of it. I think we forgot about that a lot. But to me, the narrative impact of what pledges mean to changelings in Lost is so strong that even if you never engage in the mechanics of it, you should at least be familiar with how it works because it can have a huge impact on how you play the game and the stories that you tell.
The idea of the metaphysics of Arcadia being entirely founded on pledges is, I think, what drives that home for me. It's an intriguing idea that we see echoes of from Dark Ages and Exalted the Fair Folk. But I would also, I have to stand up for dreaming here as well. Oaths in dreaming are one of those things where the narrative and the sort of fluff material, the story stuff, bears out something much more interesting than what the mechanics actually provide. Interestingly, as much as people point to Lost and the True Fae as being creatures defined by story, I would say that in dreaming, oaths are the opportunity for characters to be that. The importance of swearing an oath, it's like the dreaming weighs in because it knows that this is going to be a story with a capital S, and that's the crystallization of it. There's just not a lot of mechanics built into how to make that happen. It just says, here's the benefit, here's what happens if you break it. I like that Lost provided more around that. My only hesitation is that it feels much more transactional in this instance. So I think you kind of have to do the extra work as a storyteller or around the table of bridging that gap to make it feel more narratively significant. Maybe I just got lost in all of the subcategories and mechanics and stuff.
I think that's a fair concern. Going back to my previous point, if you find yourself getting lost in the sauce with pledges, the best thing you can possibly do is just remember it's a thing that happens in the background and say that it's a
Yeah.
thing that happens and that will have big narrative impacts. What's the deal with this seemingly ordinary mortal who's coming after me? Oh, they got wrapped up in a pledge. What's the
Yeah.
mechanics of that? It doesn't matter.
Downtime project. Figure it out later. Yeah. So briefly, the types of pledges that are covered here. You have vows, which are casual and invested into one's own weird, so you can have a number of them active equal to your weird rating plus 3. Then there are oaths, which are sworn on one's own name, either in its pure form or possibly obscured if you share it with a fetch, or on your keeper's name, which strikes me as a terrible idea, but whatever.
The book says just as much.
Yeah. Or on the name of a higher power. And then there are corporals, which are sworn on a symbol associated with either mortal life or your seeming or your court or your title if you have one or your nemesis, which is maybe the most interesting one. And I guess there's no limit to the number of oaths and corporals you can swear.
I believe there's a practical limit to one or the other, though I forget which it is. But what
Mm.
do you think about this limitation? That you can have only so many vows, and then if you want something else, it's got to be an oath or a corporal.
Just for the sake of tracking things, I'm fine with it.
I was kind of off the idea at first because I didn't like the idea that you can have only so many pledges and the one that you make with the freehold is probably going to count against one of your vows. But the idea that you have to invest something into an oath or a corporal is a good story opportunity. And I think this is
Mm-hmm.
a nice way of pressing players into making interesting decisions. One of which can be, let's not forget, that you make a promise to somebody with no magic to back it. And changelings have a lot of feelings about that.
Yeah. Careful who you swear to. I think I'm just going to read quickly through the thing on page 176 about pledge crafting because I think this nicely summarizes the very intricate process. The important thing to remember is that the parts of a pledge are the tasks involved for each party, the boons you get as a result, the sanctions that happen if you break it, and the duration that it lasts. Also is that some elements are graded from lesser to medial to greater. If you have elements that can combine, two lesser will tend to make a medial thing, and two medial will make a greater thing. And usually that shakes out to modifiers of plus or minus 1, 2, 3, respectively. So, bearing all that in mind, here are the steps. Step 1, determine the tasks involved for each party of the pledge. Tasks are rated with a negative number that reflects how onerous the task is to complete. Lesser tasks, -1, are relatively simple to fulfill, while greater tasks, -3, are quite epic in scope. Step 2, determine the boons involved for each party of the pledge. Boons are rated with a positive number that reflects the benefit of the reward for holding true to one's word. Lesser boons +1 are minor rewards, while those who hold greater boons +3 might find their very lives changed dramatically by their possession. Step 3, determine the sanctions involved for each party of the pledge. Sanctions are rated with a negative number reflecting the power of the curse that befalls the Oathbreaker. Lesser sanctions, -1, are annoying hindrances, while the terrible punishments of greater sanctions, -3, are the stuff of legend. Step 4, determine the duration involved for each party of the pledge. The duration is rated with a positive number reflecting the length of time the weird binds the pledge to the fate of those involved. Lesser durations, +1, exist for short time, while pledges of greater duration, +3, are bound up for at least a year and possibly longer. Step 5. The sum of each party's tasks, boons, and sanctions must sum to 0 when added to the duration of the pledge. This may require some adjusting of other aspects to make the expectations of each party equitable. Sidebar, the whole equitability clause, I think that that's something which should be more flexible, but we can get to that later, especially when it gets to like goblin stuff. Anyway. Step 6. Determine the invocation cost for the pledge. All pledges cost 1 point of willpower to invoke, plus any additional modifiers for specific aspects. A common one in this regard is some require a dot of willpower, especially things like fealty, I think, requires it. Step 7. Determine the type of pledge involved for the pledge as a whole. All those taking part in the pledge must be eligible to make that kind of pledge, i.e., non-changelings may not make mortal corporal pledges. Instilling the power of the pledge's weird into either their own weird, in the case of a vow, into a name, in the case of oaths, or into an object symbolic of their connections with others, in the case of a corporal. And then finally, step 8, the terms of the pledge are described to all parties and all agree, paying the necessary invocation cost. The weird settles the pledge into the fate of all parties, and the pledge is sealed. So, like I said, minigame. And it's a minigame I'd be happy to play, but it's just,
If that sounded like a lot to anybody, good news. There's 2, 4 pages of examples in this, so you do not have to do the work.
Do you have a favorite of the examples, out of curiosity?
Ooh, a favorite example. First off, I absolutely love the picture of the gentleman looking back at a willow tree. I don't know what is going on there, but it's always struck me as a beautiful thing. A favorite of them, gosh, I'm going to have to look through this as we are going. I always thought that their write-up of the actual text for them was a little bit weird. There's a lot of these where they describe what they are doing narratively, and then I read the actual effect and go, I have no idea how the other party would have guessed that you are doing this. So I don't think I have a specific one that I'm favored of. I do have a thing that I particularly like. The one where you can enchant mortals so they can see everything part of Fae.
The Oath of the Rose and Thorn.
Yep, and they can gain benefits for doing this, which ties into the other thing that I really like and wish there was even more of, that you can grant mortals random benefits like, hey, how would you like to be rich? Do you not like your looks? I could make you more beautiful looking, literally give you the striking looks merit. My only complaint is that they don't have a narrative thing, so there's nothing where you can just say, literally, hey, how about the blessing is, do you want gender affirmation? Great, here's a pledge which makes that happen. I would have loved to have seen something like that.
Yeah, and there's not much structure to determine whether any changeling can craft any of these. I don't think there's any sort of, you must have weird 3 to do this pledge. Must be this glamorous to ride.
You could be a weird one changeling that takes the longevity one and says, I'm going to bind your entire family down several
Right.
generations.
As long as it balances out to 0. Yeah.
As long as it bounces out to 0, which, oh boy, we could really get in the details, but we haven't even talked about tokens or the hedge yet.
I know. Oh my god, let's get through. Briefly, I did want to mention, so going through this, I won't go through all the categories, but page 185 does list, like, very handily a table of all of the tasks, boons, sanctions, and durations, so you can quickly and easily do the math. Very helpful. Some of the more interesting ones, my favorite among the samples is the Pledge of Horn and Bone, where a changeling vows to watch over a mortal's dreams. Just watch, just kind of make sure nightmares don't happen or whatever. But they are forbidden from saying what they see. And I just thought that was like a really interesting kind of dynamic. And the fact that you would have to do that night after night for an entire month or season as the options for duration, that's like a really interesting kind of temporary story hook to follow for an Oniro pomp. So the dreaming category allows access to dreams, so that follows from that. Ensorcelment, which is basically enchantment in dreaming terms. The implication here, and this is related to the Rose and Thorn one, you can't enchant someone without their permission. They may give it very casually, but you can't just throw glamour at someone and enchant them in the way that you can in dreaming, which is interesting. You have Blessing, which gives merit dots, Curse, which nerfs dice. I love the poisoning of boon sanction, where if you break the pledge, the benefit that you get is somehow twisted into a disadvantage. That's like a very awesome fairy tale kind of thing. So I dig those. And the write ups too, the samples, so they give you like the tasks, the boons, the description. But something really useful is that at the start, they give you two options of wording. One is very elaborate and formal and maybe antiquated. And then there's like a casual one for how it might shake out in conversation to get someone to agree. So it's a solid section. I enjoy it. And then a random comment about polyamory at the end, because why not?
Why not? How about dream shaping now?
Oh, another example, I think, of how Lost leaned hard into something Dreaming players wanted and created a mini game with much more than you would absolutely need in a given game.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely points to the role of changelings as dream influencers rather than just, in quotes, dream spawn, as the Cathane are. There's really a lot more direct potential to kind of perceive, enter, and manipulate dreams to different ends for the Lost.
And what are those ends?
Well, there's so many. But it depends on the type of oneiromancy that you're doing. Because we have three, I guess, levels, you could call them. Without going into all the mechanical particulars, we have dream riding, which is basically just hanging out in someone's dream. If you're doing this, you may analyze what's going on in their psychology, learn something about the dreamer. You can do psychotherapy on them, plant subliminal messages. You can also do what's called scouring the intensity. We should probably point out here that, per the rules, a given dream has an intensity rating, which influences a lot of the other oneiromantic mechanics. So yeah, you can scour the intensity and reduce it if you then want to manipulate it more easily. Or you can search for the dream poison of the true fae, which is like, yes, give me that story hook. So that's
I had a concern that I think you can normally only enter the dreams either of yourself or of
yes.
people that you've made a pledge with. I feel like there is an exception to that, but I'm forgetting what it is.
Is there not a contract that lets you do it? I
I'll
can't remember.
I'll go check the contracts. If you want to go on while I pull those up, I'll let you know if I find it.
I'll plow through. Then there's dreamscaping, where you're actively creating a new dream. You can't start it in the middle of someone else's dream. You have to wait until they're kind of between REM cycles, I guess. They call it a fallow psyche, which, sure. But dreamscaping, you can create a dream which you then use for healing or teaching or doing stress management or just giving them nightmares because some fae roll like that. Finally, there's dream weaving, where you create a dream outside of a mind and store it inside an object for later use that will be in contact with the dreamer. It can be personalized to an individual or able to be experienced by anyone. It may contain a contract, which is called the weird dream. I have questions around that, like, if you put a contract in one of these objects, can somebody use it with the catch so they don't have to spend glamour? But I'm not so hung up on those questions. So those are the three levels, and ultimately the base rules of a dream are set by the dreamer, which leaves a lot of open-endedness despite all the mechanics. But I do think it's interesting to consider how this plays out in a game, because it's almost like the storyteller and the player start creating the setting together and negotiating what will unfold. It's maybe a more direct way of doing that than you usually get in a role-playing game. So I'm into it.
I checked and I could not find anything. They have systems for
Yeah.
summoning armaments while you're in a dream or custom crafting dreams, but nothing about how to enter a dream unless you've made a pledge with somebody. Hmm.
Which is probably nice for the mortals that the Fae can't just charge in. But that would be easy enough too, I would say. Like, you could just say, oh, there's a trot in the hedge and you happen to stumble across someone's dream. Like, I know that's kind of mashing dreaming cosmology into things, but
That is in the game in second edition. They introduced the idea that the hedge connects to another place called the Dreaming Roads. And from there, you
oh,
can
right.
literally wander into mortal dreams. And there's also contracts they introduce that let you walk up to a mortal, touch their head, and hop into their dreams.
That's probably what I'm thinking of, because I think my fellow changeling in the second edition game that I was in had that contract. I think, but I can't remember.
I think the big thing which comes after dream intensity is they talk about dreaming and characters, and they give us a bunch of examples that
Mm,
you went over, including things like prophetic dreams. I think the intention here is that you're usually going to be hopping into the dreams of people that you've made a pact with and doing things to their benefit or possibly against them.
yeah.
Like, you could take somebody who's a real mess of a person. Like, just think of somebody who's toxic, but also wants to change. You could make a pledge with them and then hop into their dreams where you make them confront their fears, their insecurities, the terrible things that come out of that, and help them achieve some catharsis and become a better person.
Just very briefly, there is an exception to your own dreams and pledged mortals' dreams. You can always enter your fetch's dreams. So there's that. But
Oh boy.
um, no, I agree. I really liked that they kind of attended to all of those sort of interesting variations of dreams and how they might impact all of these tasks that you're trying to accomplish. There's also, I mean, a much more direct task is the Oniramaki, or dream battle, where you're
Yeah.
either fighting as you would fight in the real world within a dream, or using the dream as your weapon to presumably fight another changeling. And you have things like dream defenses and dream damage. The thing that intrigues me is stunting, which feels like an Exalted Fairfolk holdover.
It is, very much so.
Yeah.
I love Oniramaki. I don't know how you get into some random person's dream in order to confront them. This feels like maybe they forgot about that,
Hmm.
because the only other case I could see this coming up in the core book would be fighting against the true Fae directly, which seems like a
Good
terrible
luck.
idea. Yeah. So I kind of see like the most common use for this might be two changelings somehow agreeing to meet inside the minds of one of them or a mortal that they're both interested in and finding it out there. I don't know how it would happen, but this feels like something that I would be willing to hand wave for the sake of let's have cool battles and dreams.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want.
Why not? And speaking of those true Fae, we get
Oh
notes
yeah.
about how they can poison or warp dreams, including making their poison contagious. They can also manipulate a sleepwalking human. This all felt honestly much more Fomorian in dreaming terms, and it's almost as though the keeper aspects of the true Fae don't really matter here. They would still be compelling villains even if they were just these nightmare things. So,
I do find it absolutely terrifying that they can hop in, take over a mortal's dreams, and then make people want to spread the contagion that they put on people,
yeah.
make them do things. I think why do they do this? Is it that they can make mortals wander into the hedge? Is it for some other purpose?
They are inscrutable.
Oh, one thing they can do, which changelings can do as well, is harvest dreams for glamour. I think this is a
Mm.
cool concept, but also kind of unwieldy, given that changelings can just harvest glamour from any rando in the waking world. I don't see the need to go into a dream and deal with all that nonsense to try to harvest.
Maybe it just tastes better. I don't know. It's like you get gourmet meal by entering dreams. Onerophagy. Um,
Creepy.
the dreams of supernatural creatures naturally are protected.
Aw.
Anything else on dream shaping?
I think I'm ready to go on to tokens.
Tokens. Items taken from the hedge or otherwise infused with fairy, more or less equivalent to dreaming treasures, and with similarly unclear balance related to like first and second edition treasures. It's not so simple as, oh, just stick a contract of the same level on this and Bob's your uncle. Nevertheless, flavor wise, I love them. This is always one of my favorite things to look for in a book. And yeah, you activate them by rolling weird. No willpower bump is allowed, but occasionally there are modifiers, or you can just spend a point of glamour. Each token has a benefit, its own mean, which is usually just a more mundane version of what it is, a drawback for using it, and a catch where anyone, including non-Fey, importantly, can use it for free. So overall, they're rather more tricksy than treasures, but I'm okay with that. That fits more with the mood of the game, I feel. Any favorites here?
Oh dear, yes. My favorites are, of course, hedgespun raiments. Just look as awesome as you want.
Sure.
The biting grotesquerie. This is the one that it's a little homunculus like thing. Its only purpose is to bite people and cause them to suffer hallucinations, both giddying and terrifying. I have a general thought, which is that although I like a lot of the benefits that you get for the tokens, I often feel like the drawback and especially the catch make them
Yes.
very circumstantially useful.
That being said, so my favorite is the driver's little helper, both because I think that this section it does a good job of really demonstrating how a one dot token can be immensely useful, sometimes more so than a 4 or 5, kind of for that reason. Like the drawback of driver's little helper, it's after an hour, the car that you're driving overheats and shuts down. So it's like, well, just don't drive for more than an hour. And you get all these benefits from this good luck charm along the way. So it's like, yeah. I also like the cracked mirror where you have to like cut your own face before you use it for the catch. But yeah, that's true. What's the favorite trifle?
My favorite trifle is the Glimmer Braid. A
Ah,
section of braided hair bravely stolen from a true fae or simply thieved from a figure in the hedge casts a powerful though temporary illusion upon the holder of the braid. You just have to hold it in one hand, tug on it for the other. For the rest of the scene, whoever has the braid gains the benefits and drawbacks of the Fey merit at 3 dots. Keep in mind that makes you as famous as the biggest celebrity names that you can think of. And yes, while you can use it on yourself, you can sneak it into somebody else's pocket and make them horribly confused about why they're being mobbed in front of the club with screaming fans, as the game puts it.
we should point out also trifles, the distinction is that they are one use. And therefore they don't have a drawback because there's no like ongoing curse. And they're only for changelings, so there's no catch.
By the way, if anybody is wondering, well, how do you make a token or where do they come from?
Yeah, good
Don't
question.
know. Book doesn't say.
I mean, just like treasures, for so long we had so little.
Just search the hedge. Just search the hedge.
Yeah.
I guess.
And overall, all of these point to like the more gutter fey or trinket fey aesthetic than dreaming has, I would say. Like treasures and dreaming are usually fancier and not cursed by comparison. So my favorite trifle is the sting seed, the bullet that causes plants to grow from the bullet wounds.
Oh God,
So good.
yes.
Anyway, all right, so we've got one more big chunk in this chapter. The hedge. So, we talked a little bit about the hedge before, But as a reminder, key features are that it is psychoactive, responding to the mindset of the traveler. It resembles the landscape that it sprang from, but is always somehow labyrinthine. The deeper one gets into it, the more the rules of the hedge obey the Fae who rule the realms that you're approaching. And those Fae like to offer easy paths to entice you in. And one becomes lost unless you keep view of the mortal world. This last piece in particular, I was curious if you've run games in the hedge, how you manage that. Because later we get this example of the character following streetlights, and it seems that that's sort of that's functioning more like a silver path that you can follow rather than like a point of reference you have to keep in view at all times. So even though the hedge does kind of parallel the real world's geography, the mortal world aspect doesn't necessarily have to, was kind of how I read that.
What's the question? I'm a run it by me again.
How do you have your characters keep one eye or a connection to the mortal world while traveling the hedge to not become lost, if possible?
That's a great question. In the games that I have run, I did not think about it very much the first time that I ran Changing the Lost, and I've had more of an eye towards it since running my latest campaign,
Hmm.
where the player characters in this one are not changelings, but they happen to be visiting the hedge sometimes, and they oftentimes have to be careful upon the journey that they are taking. If you want to keep an eye on the mortal world, I think the whole point is that you kind of cannot do that. That for mortals, they're going to lose track of it. And even changelings who know they need to, well, at some point, you're going to have to be walking backwards or up hills or otherwise through obstacles that require your full attention.
Hmm.
So you're probably going to need a bit of magic or good head spinning to find your way back. A brief story I want to give is that I did have a story where a mortal was locked in a gymnasium. A door opened up. They're like, huh, that's weird. It looks out into the parking lot that I want to go to. They stepped through it and they discovered, oh, weird. I'm in a big empty lot that doesn't look familiar. I can see the school parking lot back over there. Well, I should go there. But then they hear the shouts of the bullies that had locked them in the gym in the first place and see their shadows, not realizing that these are hobgoblins trying to scare them away. And they run deeper into the hedge because that's what it wants to do to people.
Yeah, there's always this aspect of like fear and misleadingness and but temptation at the same time.
Which is why the best thing to do is to hop on a trod, and that is why that is also the worst thing to do. Because a bit about the landscape of the hedge. We talked about this before, that it's psychoactive, it shows you visions of things that you want to see, it tries to lead you into dangerous areas full of horrible monsters or literal thorns that will kill you. But there are paths through it that you can follow. The trick is that the paths that look the brightest, shiniest, and safest are the ones that are also most often patrolled by monsters and the true Fae if they do not just directly lead to Arcadia itself, which is how a lot of mortals get captured. They get lost, they find a big path, they go, oh, look, this has street lamps on it, and in the distance, I can see a big mansion. Well, I don't know where I'm at, but I'll go there and look for help.
It's also changelings are at a bit of a disadvantage because they are noticeable in the hedge. They attract things with their presence, and they're always visible in their mien, so everyone knows what they are. There's a number of subcategories in this section. I have a few notes about each that I can just rocket through.
Sure. Go through them and I will
All
add
right.
comments because this is easily the longest thing and I would go on forever.
I may include a link in the show notes to the episode that Terry Robinson of Mage the Podcast did with the author Lauren Roy, who wrote the book The Hedge for second edition, about sort of
Ooh.
story opportunities for that, because that was a really good listen for kind of conceptualizing some of this. But anyway, so there are notes about the hedge and morality. The hedge is full of these thorns with a capital T that catch at the soul. They tend to remove inhibition. If a changeling loses sight of the mortal world, they degenerate faster. Mortals don't have to check for degeneration until they get back and consider the consequences of what heinous acts they committed within the hedge. And supernatural creatures each have their own kind of way of dealing with its mysterious influence. But yeah, the thorns, in addition to harming your body, can also tear away at your soul or your sense of self. Then shaping the hedge depends on your weird rating, with higher ratings allowing greater environmental shifts. The area around a freehold more directly reflects its ruler's signature, regardless of their weird rating. And I was thinking about, well, two things. I'm really into the Fearless in Dreaming, that sort of chaos storm thing that sweeps through and rearranges things. And there are occasional things in Dreaming, like there's the Fear Bolg birthright, there's the old Dreamcraft art, which would allow you to control it. And this reminds me of that as a system. The other thing is, if the hedge reflects the signature or the personality of its ruler, there's, I feel, an opportunity there for some kind of heraldry system, and I'm not sure what I want to do with that yet, but it's on my mind.
I think a great thing to do with that is to literally say things like, hey, the court leader's personal crest appears on banners around the bounds of the freehold's territory.
Why are there so many peacocks rampant in this part of the forest?
Yeah, we don't know who put them there, but we do know whose territory we're in.
So, why would a changeling go into the hedge if there are all of these issues? Well, some of the motivations that we get include collecting goblin fruit, which we'll get to in a minute in terms of why you would want to do that. Travel, because following the trods can be quicker or sometimes safer or just cheaper than other forms of transportation. There's a whole sidebar about that.
Specifically, if you want to go to some place that is very far away, miles or even another country, traveling through the hedge will get you there very quickly and is in fact much safer than trying to travel from your home to the corner store through the hedge.
Yes. Some folks also go into the hedge for duels, which again we'll get to shortly. Some create hollows, which we talked about when we discussed merits, where they can hide out. And some just have personal reasons for going in. But those are changeling reasons. Mortals just get curious. And one of the things that I really like in here, I think it actually comes up in a later subsection, mortals can sometimes stumble into the hedge by fulfilling their vice. Like, if they're gluttonous and they engage in gluttony, the hedge kind of creeps in and presents this tempting opportunity based on that experience that may lure them in. And I really like that as a thing that mortals are susceptible to.
This is where we talk about one of my favorite things with the hedge, which are keys. That is,
Yes.
changelings can simply walk up to any known portal into the hedge, or really any door at
Any
all.
portal.
And yeah, they can walk up to any normal door, knock on it, open it up, and it leads into the hedge. You can even create new passageways this way. The thing is, mortals can go through any of those portals because all of those portals generate keys. And the key is whatever will open it up. And this can be something as simple as you said, like, wait, is the Vice one universal, or is that just an example of it?
I think the vice is a universal. I think it's considered separate from a key because the key, I think, accrues over time.
Okay. Then I'll talk about keys for a moment then.
Yeah, go for it.
So as you were saying, a vice is something like in the example I gave earlier, this kid was trapped in a gymnasium. He wanted an out, and there happened to be a portal at the back of the gymnasium. It's like, so you want to say be outside of the school? Well, take a look. This door just happens to lead into the parking lot. Weird that you never noticed it before. Wouldn't that be great to just walk through? But keys are all the rituals that you think of from fairy tales. Like if you step into a fairy circle, or if you try to work your way into the knothole of a tree, or if you walk backwards into this stone portal, they can become very obscure, but some of them are so easy to do by accident that there's entire groups of changelings who dedicate themselves to watching over portals to make sure that mortals do not walk through them.
Yeah. And leaving the hedge is much more difficult than entering it, importantly.
Yeah.
The roll is intelligence plus investigation plus weird to find a gateway, but it takes more successes the longer you've been there. And I mean, it escalates quickly. Like 24 to 48 hours takes 10 successes on that roll, which I guess you can do over multiple rolls, but still, it's a lot of successes you need.
What it really is for people is this is great story fodder for getting lost in the hedge and,
Yeah.
getting on an adventure and finding somebody to help you get out.
Yeah. And you can modulate this depending on the kind of story you want to tell. Like, I do appreciate the note they have somewhere with navigation where it's like, if the point of the story is the journey, then it doesn't really matter how much time it should take to get here and get there. It moves at the speed of plot. So it's like, yeah, okay. But if you then want to actually mechanize the getting from point A to point B, it's like, okay, roll intelligence plus survival, and here's the results. So choose your poison.
And for those who do want something convenient, not all trods are going to lead to Arcadia or have hedge monstrosities running around them. Some of them are smaller, safer, or well patrolled by the local freehold.
Right, boring. Yeah. There are also a couple helpful sidebars throughout this section, like what if a mortal discovers a key, or I know derangements are, we can unpack the whole concept, but I do like the idea of wanderlust afflicting characters who generally can't enter the hedge on their own, and they just kind of become compelled to walk. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Then there's there's also a sidebar entitled "Are We All Soulless?" and I'm like, okay, settle down, book. Sheesh. Rounding out the section, we have a couple more categories here. We have goblin fruits, which grow in the hedge and restore health or willpower, or sometimes have other bonuses and drawbacks. There are
I
also
love them.
no, they're great. Um, there are also oddments, which are usable items rather than edible things. Ultimately, your weird determines how many you can carry. Weird 1, you can carry 3. Weird 2, you can carry 5, and it kind of builds from there. Any favorites among the goblin fruit and oddment examples?
Oh, well, first off, I have to point out that the goblin fruit section is accompanied by an excellent picture of
Yes.
somebody who is just munching down on goblin fruits. I like the amaranthine,
Mhm.
which has a pretty simple effect. It looks like a small red eggplant, heals you of a single point of aggravated damage. You can eat as much as you want, but heal only 1 point, which I think is honestly pretty cool.
Useful.
Oh, yeah, does this one not have the oh, there it is. The Jenny Stone is one of the oddments.
Yeah.
Described as ostensibly from Jenny Greenteeth, the folk legend, it's just the hard seed of the Jenny Stone bush, about as big as acorns and inedibly bitter. They are an oddment, though, because they stink. Jenny obviously didn't take care of her teeth, and these reeking ones spilled from her mouth as the story goes.
Aw.
They exude a nauseating scent in a 5-yard diameter, so potent that they inflict a -1 dice pool penalty on anyone with a sense of smell unfortunate enough to be in the area. I love this oddment. It is a little bit silly. It's also useful, and I think it's a great example of the odd ecology of the hedge.
Mhm.
That it's not just a place to pass through, it is a place that changing scholars can spend an entire lifetime studying in order to catalog local fruits and oddments.
Yeah. See, the plot right there for your game. We then get hedge duels, where if you engage in a formal duel, you can then shape the hedge more directly than your weird would otherwise allow. You can fight through physical attack, which is very common. Nobody does that. No proper duelist would just stab someone. You can target your opponent's mind by calling them names and whatever. Or, most interestingly, of course, you can use the hedge itself as your weapon. And I think that's kind of what they're pushing people towards. And I like the idea, but honestly, given how much text we get on so many of the other things in this section of this chapter, it felt weird that we got comparatively little on the duels. I was thinking, like, is there dueling culture? What kinds of environmental things can you do? Can you give me some examples of what exactly would
You're
happen?
right. It's a pretty short system.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. It might get expanded later. I was trying to remember if there's a book that delves into it more, but yeah. And then we get notes about threats, namely changelings, especially the ones who live in the hedge and have carefully maintained hollows, who are rather parted from their humanity, as well as privateers working for the gentry. There are true fae with their retinues who can pass through the briars off the paths without ill effect, and hobgoblins, which is just any monster you can think of.
I think this is their first proper example of mentioning hobgoblins in the book.
I think you might be right. They're just these mysterious creatures.
We don't know what they are, but we know that they are there in the hedge, and they can be anything from seemingly ordinary people, something odd about them, to feral beasts. And we'll get into more about them in the storytelling chapter.
And especially in Autumn Nightmares, I think.
Oh, yeah.
The final piece is this extended journey into the hedge scene that covers a lot of the mechanics and how to narrate them, just sensible given how much complexity there is around the hedge. So overall, a rich chapter, a couple oddly thin descriptions like how to build tokens or the hedge duels that are balanced by incredibly dense ones like the pledges system and the oniromancy that could each be games in their own right. I sort of feel like when planning a chronicle, you'd have to determine how much of each of these systems you want to account for, right? Like before you even get into it, it's like, okay, how many pledges are they going to make and how am I going to make this easier for myself?
I think that ties into a bigger question of how you want to run a game. I have had a story where a neuromancy was the feature piece of it,
Mm,
but I also guided the players through it, all of whom were new to playing Lost. This chapter is a great example of a bunch of great systems that are awesome to talk about that you should really introduce players to slowly. They don't
yeah,
need to know everything about wandering the hedge, hedge duels, aneromancy, aneromachy,
right,
and
up front.
pledge crafting up front.
Yeah. Well, speaking of chronicle planning, that brings us to Chapter 4 Storytelling. Hooray!
Hooray! What do we got for our opening fiction here?
I immediately want to use this Motley and Storyhook for a game.
Mm.
These are the ones who all emerge together through mirrors and they realize they're missing two of their number and they're like, we're going back to find them. I'm like, yes, yes.
And Pooka here is not being metaphorical. They have numbers
Yeah,
2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 on their backs. So they know they're missing 1 and 5. And the idea of the story hook of hunting down the missing 2 members, God, that is beautiful.
my youngest sibling always used to talk about wanting to do this prank, which I think they got from the internet somewhere, that was releasing, I forget if it was chickens or pigs or whatever, but
Yes.
putting 1, 2, 3, and 5 on them and not having a 4, but everyone's looking for it. And so I read this and I think this is just how the true Fae are going to get them to come back.
Ooh. Oh,
So
that's good. That's
right,
really good.
and it doesn't cross their minds at all. They're like, oh, we must be missing 2. No, you fools. Anyway, but yeah, it is a very awesome and compelling opening. So
What do you think about the opening quote? Because I gonna read it, but I do not get this one. Let there be the Pasitu demon among the people to snatch the baby from its mother's lap. So from Atrahasis.
Atrahasis, yes.
Yes, Patitsu is another way of saying Pazuzu, but not really sure what this quote is doing here. Kind of vaguely Fey, maybe? True Fey?
So Atrahasis, I don't know much about it. I know that is the epic of Akkad from ancient Mesopotamia. I mean, compared with like Gilgamesh or one of the better known ones, I don't know exactly what the background is. I do agree, though, it is kind of a random quote. Maybe because it's a very old story that is vaguely snatching, changeling, kidnapping related. Eh?
Yeah. Last thing I want to make is an aesthetic note. I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but I love how they incorporate thorns into both the borders
Mm,
of almost every page and also into the chapter titles themselves. It
yeah,
looks gorgeous.
agreed.
What do we got for the actual content, though?
Yeah, for the content. So we open up on kind of a meditation around the beautiful madness idea again, but here it's leaning more into creating the mood around it and the rather Victorian idea of fear and awe around madness. All of that through the distortion of the world of darkness. It's interesting because this is a storytelling chapter, but it doesn't directly get into the actual nuts and bolts of storytelling. It kind of first relies on the vibes The first subheader section we get is entitled Of Wonder and Horror. And here it feels like they're really trying to thread the needle between the approach they're describing of leaning into the mood, which is more aligned with fairy tales themselves, and real world things that they reflect, such as the issue that madness is rarely very beautiful for those involved. They attempt to do this, I would say, by emphasizing stylization and making it cerebral alongside the visceral. So, talking about madness and beauty, intrigue and nightmare along just gore.
They
But
did a good job in my mind of one half of this, selling me on the idea of finding beauty in, I think, as they put it, strange places and conjunctions. That this is a world where you can go to a club and in the middle of the dance floor, you see a Jin or a Pooka busting out moves.
guilty.
There you go. But I think that they get a little voyeuristic with the part about madness. It has this really ripped from the headlines vibes about co-opting stories about people dealing with mental illness, and I really feel like that was just a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe it's a function of the time that it was written. I don't know. The thing I have in my notes is that, frankly, there's not much pure wonder in here. Like, the only wonder we get is that voyeuristic kind of take on madness. And granted, given the moods that we had laid out in the World of Darkness core book for this game, I would say wonder isn't necessarily as much of a factor as it would be in Dreaming, for example. But if you wanted to go in this direction with all of the content warnings, you could lean into the sort of very delicate forms of squick that they lay out, which is its own kind of wonder.
I think the source of wonder ties in most closely to beauty. I could get into an example of that, but do you see an overlap there between beauty and wonder?
Well, I think I mentioned this in our pre-show typing about this. I really like Kant's theory of the sublime and the sort of things that have derived from that. The way that I usually formulate it when I talk about it to people is the sublime is the feeling and the response that you have when confronted by something that is too big to be comprehended. And he subdivided it into the noble, the beautiful, and the terrifying, or I guess horrific sublime. So the beautiful sublime is just overwhelmingly beautiful, and you can't fully get your head around it. So you like kind of fixate on the aspects that you can. And then similarly, the terrifying sublime, the sort of go-to example is death. Death and mortality are just too big for us to comprehend, so we kind of focus on crystallizations of it. We focus on causes of death and things to avoid, and these sort of like, actionable things so that we don't have to try to get our heads around the entirety of what death means. So in that sense, I do think you can find wonder in those aspects. I'm not convinced that they get there in this write-up.
I want to share my own thoughts on how you do bring wonder in then, since they don't really cover that here.
Go for it.
So, this is a game where, first, I want to say they emphasize that this is a game of the fantastical intruding on modernity, as they put it. That it's an urban fantasy game.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's also a game of fairy tales with a heavy horror twist. I think all of that is lovely. But I also think it is coherent to have a game where you show the beauty of the community that people have built. That you have characters who, like in my game, I have the Changelings were all kidnapped, sent to an Arcadia that's like an isekai world, and they came back and created a freehold they named Konosekai, which just means this world. They modeled a mortal school based upon Japanese high schools.
Because isekai.
Yeah, because isekai. And subverting what the Keeper wanted from them. But the school is also attended by... It's a school that Changelings go to as a cover so they can build up new mortal lives. And at the same time, it's a school that mortals go to, but the mortals cannot see the Fae aspect of it, nor do they understand that if you walk through certain passageways, you wind up in a hedge reflection of the school, which is where you'll find botanical classes on goblin fruits and occult studies on other supernatural creatures, instructions in hedge dueling. But it seeps through enough that mortals have Like, the Immortal kids have legends about ghost stories and moving statues and weird passageways in the school. I find that to be wondrous. I find it equally wondrous that I was able to have a story where a character, a trans girl, went on a journey where she was the head of the student council, which, as you must know for following tropes, which can be fun here, that it's the most powerful position in the entirety of the school, better than being principal, of course. But she was a trans girl and she had a very conservative family. She was dating one of the Fae, one of the changelings, who saw her looking very much like how the keeper of all of the changelings at the school looks. She goes on a journey that the PCs help her with of being able to affirm her gender with magic, which involves going to the hedge, meeting a fairy vampire who has a
Oh my.
garden of goblin fruit wonders and does a ritual. And there's a big coming out thing that's full of drama and magic. And it's, to me, it is just beautiful that we can have these stories of literal magic in the modern day that can be as affirming as they are terrifying. To me, that is an inextricable part of the Lost experience. And I've heard of games that try to focus upon just the dull and glum, but I don't think the designers wanted you to do that, which is especially clear in the first chapter. And even though the storytelling chapter doesn't say a lot about it, I consider it part of the soul of the game.
I think that's all fair. One brief thing that I would add to that too, that as someone, as a poet, the wonder in very small everyday things, I feel like, is an aspect that doesn't get enough appreciation here. Just like there's poetry does it better, so I don't mind that it's not in here. But that aesthetic is something which I think could fit in here if you wanted it to.
This ties into a complaint I actually have about this section. There is a section about understanding the changeling.
Got that next in my notes.
Other than human is one header, but less than true fae. Other than human is the most confounding part of this book for me, which says that you aren't human, which is, I think, a little unfair to start off with, but okay, sure, provocative title. They explain how you were changed by it, which I think is good. But then they have this bit where they say what this translates to within the context of a story is a sense of isolation.
Mhm.
Changelings should frequently see exhibitions of mortal gestalt, whether positive or negative, jovial, desperate, violent, or euphoric. And while changelings can participate, they won't really feel a part of what's going on. For example, a motley of changelings can certainly visit a parade thronged with mortals, and the changelings may even see images that bring to mind the towering terrors of fairy, etc. But in the end, the reasons for throwing the parade will elude them. What does
Mhm.
quote unquote Thanksgiving mean to a changeling? I'll stop there, but it goes on, and I don't get that, because that is not a vibe I pick up from the rest of the book. That feels kind of like a changeling who's completely maybe lost their clarity and lives in the hedge, but that feels way too alien for how I've conceived of changelings from the rest of the book. What do you think?
I would say that was written by someone who never played Dreaming. And I think that distinction between the games that I've pointed to before is borne out even more in the sidebar on the next page, entitled The Best of Both Worlds, pointing to Lost really approaches the bifurcation of human and fae as your character isn't quite part of either, and that really gnaws away at them, right? Whereas Dreaming is your character is fully part of both and has to figure out how to navigate that. So it's a very different kind of in betweenness. I don't think presenting the mindset as in some way inhuman is necessarily bad. When we did the mini-sode a while back about additional Mind's Eye Theater content, something Pete Woodworth had done in Mind's Eye Theater Journal number 8 was about getting into that inhuman mindset. And I think some of that advice is echoed here. You can describe these things in a way that hit their emotions in oblique ways, ways that are very personalized to them, that aren't what ordinary humans would necessarily experience. And at the same time, they don't fully understand the fae or fairy that they escaped from. So creating this like twofold isolation. But yeah, to your point, like beyond the fact that it makes it difficult to see how you would get courts and societies and motleys that feel any affection for each other out of that, it also doesn't, in my opinion, make for a very good play experience if your character is so defined by feeling cut off from others. Like, you may be playing these beings that have some kind of fundamental reason to be antisocial, but role playing itself is fundamentally a social activity. So it just kind of feels clunky as a result to me.
Maybe what they were trying to emphasize was that because of their experience with Arcadia, changelings do see things differently from your
Yeah,
average mortal, but maybe they just went a little bit too hard in this one subsection of the book.
it's also very much a snapshot. There's not really attention to how this can become an arc. They mention changelings, essentially, they remember their humanity but have lost their sort of emotional affinity for it, and that's part of their isolation. But I could very easily see a character having their arc centered around trying to reclaim that, rediscover why this parade is important. Sort of a very Seven of Nine journey, if I can make a Star Trek parallel.
Sure can.
Uh,
That's
But if you don't have that, some other options, they present vectors for perhaps having some emotional involvement and a sense of purpose to counter that isolation. You have things like your seeming and your court, because the need for companionship and mutual support eventually grows into these social structures whose machinations are an end in and of themselves, I would say.
I never did much with the seemings as a group in my games. But to me, the courts were always important.
Yeah,
I used the traditional 4 seasonal. The spring court, their main area was well, okay, they all have different social gatherings that they do. They all work together. They have places like one of them has a bar, one of them has the high school, one of them has
coffee shop,
a
coffee shop.
Oh, okay. The Winter Court Queen owns Maid in Heaven, which is a maid cafe that a lot of the local changelings work in, and also
Perfect.
runs a place called the Halfway Home, which is where most of the changelings stay at when they first come out. She's the winter mom and is beloved and terrifying and scary to everybody in equal measure. I love having these being people that characters interact with. I love seeing the PCs call an NPC character mom. I love doing the once per quarter handoff of the courts and showing what do these parties look like they hold when they hand things off from one ruler to another. It's so much fun to do with Lost that I highly recommend anybody who plays these games get really, really into the mood for courts.
And if you prefer playing Dreaming, the Storyteller's Vault Supplement Book of Days has some options to bring courts into your game. Anyway,
Such a good book.
shameless self promotions.
It's a
Yeah.
really good book. Use it.
Oh, stop. No, I agree. The courts, yeah, and we're going to see more of this when we get into future supplements. Anyway,
Please, what do we have here for the rest of the storytelling chapter?
so we also have Shifting Perceptions, which suggests the occasional use of dream imagery from both storyteller and player to represent the character's Fey heritage, filtered through clarity. So dream imagery as a motif that ties into the theme of madness and dreams. I guess so. I'm into it.
I know this is called storytelling, but I highly recommend that players look at this chapter, and yes, the storytelling chapter, and a lot of the other game books that you read, because this is oftentimes where they explain what your character's mindsets are meant to be like, which includes this emphasis upon the warp perspective. So keep in mind that your characters are often going to see the world in transactional ways because that's how it worked in Arcadia. That they can get distracted by noticing a portal to the hedge or seeing a motley of ogres walking through in knightly armor that nobody else can see. They can sit in front of a fireplace and hear the fire whispering to them. That's just part of existing as a changing the world.
And in particular, depending on what their durance was like, it may be painful that the fire is so quiet now.
Oh,
You know what I mean? It's like it can
yeah.
be unsettling, unique thing in an unexpected direction as well. And a lot of the, I'm not going to go back to chapter one and flip through pages now, but the player facing side of things, not in the storytelling chapter, I feel like that dealt much more with practicalities, and this is dealing much more with phenomenologies. What is it like to be a changeling, rather than what does your day to day look like? And it's two sides of the same coin, but both are essential to really get into that headspace.
What
So,
do you think about the setting advice for
all right.
Ah,
Here
great,
we
we're on the
go.
same page.
I'm going to just, well, and I have like a full on page of notes with lots of question marks scattered through. I'm just going to launch into this and feel free to stop my roll. But starting a chronicle is the first header we get here. Foundational elements for chronicle design. So they start by talking about what city as a starting question. There are benefits and drawbacks to each of the options, be it a hometown, because if you're doing your hometown, you don't need to do much research and can give verisimilitude. But if all your players are from your hometown, that can erode some of the mystery and wonder. Somewhere else, you can create mystique that better suits a theme or mood you want. It allows for more stylization, but you have to do more research. Or you can do a fictional city, perhaps in the hedge, that can be mutable, but the unfamiliarity for players, they don't have any point of reference that they may have heard about to latch on to. That's kind of the benefit and drawback. It also points to dream encroachment as a theme here, and I was like, is that a theme? I like it. I don't recall it being a theme, but
Where do they
sure.
mention that? Because that sounds familiar, but I forget the point they make.
I mean, now I'm thinking about Brigadoon as this like poisonous phase space invading our
Oh!
reality. But
Oh, yeah, the part they say where you can say Brigadoon, yeah, adapt that,
yeah,
and I was surprised when I read that because what does that mean? That, like, you're just saying that those places actually exist here? Is that what's going on?
it's an option that's provided. I mean, yeah.
It's weird. That is, to me, maybe the only good part of this section, because most of the rest of it is just general storytelling advice.
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the yeah. And I was trying to remember how much of it is repeated. I don't think much of it is repeated, but it is kind of baffling how much of this is not in that core book as a result.
Is this not in the wow, okay, if so, that is a huge missed opportunity.
I'm gonna have to go back and compare. Yeah.
I do wanna say that the biggest thing to think about here is the idea of home for changelings is really important. And so, storytellers and player groups, when you're considering a game, you should think about why this place means so much to your character
Mm.
that they came back there. I recommend that if you choose to set your game in, well, any place, I highly recommend that you do a little bit of research into weird supernatural oddities that jump out at you and incorporate those into your game. For example, in Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I used to live, there is a campus, Arizona State University, and there's a little place called the Secret Garden.
Ooh.
It's a little garden that is secreted between a bunch of innocuous buildings, and you have to go down a narrow passageway to find it, but it's absolutely gorgeous. In my game, I made that a gateway into the hedge. So please, please, please have fun when thinking about where you want to set your changing chronicle. My biggest complaint about this section is I don't think they give you enough specific information for making it changeling related.
Well, I don't think they want to either. I mean, given how hands-off Chronicles tends to be about settings, but
Oh,
I digress.
sorry, I meant it in a slightly different way. What I meant was
Oh,
like
okay.
I don't want them to say here's Phoenix, Arizona, and the most notable things about it.
No, 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 no.
When
Yeah,
you run something in a city, here's some ways you can make that like bring
sure.
in changing vibes. That's all.
I think they're kind of hands off even about that as well. And part of that might be that they're offloading it into. I'm sure there's a Chronicles book that's like settings, but yeah, it
Oh
would
yes.
have been nice to see more of that. Something we do get, however, which tickles my demographer's heart, is Trods and population density, which we did have an episode on Fey demography last season, so this is something that I'm into. I'm glad they say so directly that you can adjust the numbers and concentrations of Fey for the sake of the story. The trods allow you a sense of cosmopolitanism and connecting freeholds or courts of different types, but they also factor into how much the hedge is a factor and how much of a threat the true fae are in your chronicle.
How many changelings would you guess are in a major city?
A major city? Well, I think I'd probably say it's similar to dreaming numbers in the sense that if you're going to have in an average large city 4 separate courts that have enough members to regularly rotate through, you're going to need like dozens of changelings to make it effective.
I agree, and I was surprised that in the appendix chapter for Miami, they specify that there are 100 changelings, which seems kind of low to me.
I'm doing the math for the Miami metropolitan area. So that's like 1 for every 5,000 or so. We'll talk about that next time. Save it for the appendix episode.
Sure.
Incidentally, the art on page 238 is the best piece of art in the book.
Oh my god, what is presumably
no
a
further
Fae-
notes.
Oh my god. Fae split up, shows different scenes from a person's life, their durance. It's absolutely wild and sets the tone for antagonists.
Yes. So here, the individual antagonists come a bit later, and here it's more about the practice of using antagonists in a chronicle, picking the ones that you want. They emphasize the diversity of options as a way to keep things fresh or creepy or wondrous or what have you, with the caveat that you need to kind of strike the middle road between having one overarching foe, because that can get tiresome, and always having a different one, because that can get monster of the week, which feels less fairy tale. The sort of Buffy method is to balance the immediate threats against the background one, the big bad. But importantly, those two kind of layers of antagonists don't necessarily need to connect to maintain a tempo of tension and reprieve for your players. There's good advice in here to introduce antagonists in the service of the story rather than the other way around, and to layer things structurally in the sense that antagonists can have helpers or their own separate antagonists versus narratively. Save that big bad for a final climactic confrontation at the apex of a chronicle rather than dropping them in right at the start and giving away the game. So this, I think, is actually like good storytelling chapters are applicable to all games, and I don't think this one is an exception. There are parts that feel especially changeling oriented, but a lot of the advice in here is actually applicable for other games, I would say, namely that section.
Yes, that's a very good overall section for. I do wish that some of this was
In the
in
core
the
book.
Chronicles core book, but I'm glad that at least they emphasize things like, hey, you don't have to have the big bad have maxed out stats and everything and just say that at the beginning of the Chronicle. Just figure it out as you go.
Mhm. And when it comes to conflict that follows hard on the heels of this, the book suggests a mix of entertaining and challenging, with variety of types of conflict cast against potentially one distinct type that really speaks to the Chronicle's specific themes. And I like that too, because you want to keep things fresh, but you also want to remind players of the specific story that they're telling. And sometimes a particular kind of conflict can do that. The rule of thumb that they give is that you should have 2 to 5 discrete conflicts per 4-hour session. I was curious whether you follow anything like that. I don't think about it that
I,
hard personally,
I
but
don't break it down like that. I'll be honest, I think that most of my game sessions, I choose one conflict, and my players can easily spend 3 to 4 hours
yeah,
working
that's
through whatever that is.
that is also more my
Uh,
experience.
This is also writing to a particular style of running games.
Hmm.
Whoever is writing this section, doing so on the assumption that the storyteller is writing out a scene by scene adventure that the players are going to proceed through, and that those scenes will have their conflicts, which is very different from the way that I run games.
Yeah, same. That's coming up soon. 2 more things to get through before we get there. We have some highlights on theme and mood. The former theme tends to emerge as the details of the story come into focus. I would add to what their advice here says, which is that you also need a sense of the characters too. But you can start with the high concept story, start from a theme and build from there. Mood is unlikely to get beyond the beautiful madness of Changeling the Lost or the stylish heart of World of Darkness in general. But ultimately, you want to be sure you're communicating both effectively. Theme you communicate through challenges and conflicts, mood you convey through description and narrative. And then there's attention given to character relationships. So, why does the group come together? How do backstory and whatnot factor in? Page 241 has some good background questions to consider, but I think character creation, when we went through that chapter, a lot of those were kind of taken care of in the prelude and whatnot. So, kind of rehashing that. And then we get basic story structures. So I'm going to preface my comments here by saying storytelling chapters also generally have to be written towards first-time storytellers. I get that. I'm also all for something more elegant and customizable than the hero's journey that was the basis of the Changeling the Dreaming Storytellers chapter. I'm not convinced that what they offer here is an improvement, but the method that they describe here is this extensive system of having a plot map and these slowly filled out lists of bullet points where you have an introductory event at the beginning and a chronicle climax at the end, and then you work backwards step by step to fill it out. Each of these seems to get its own session, even though some of them feel much less momentous than others. And then there's this like step by step example of how to do this. All of this really felt like planning a chronicle within an inch of its life. And as someone who prefers sandbox method, I found this like way too exhaustive. And the absolute last thing I needed was the thing at the end about how to incorporate other supernatural creatures. I was like, nope, don't need that right now.
I have two thoughts. One is I'm with you on this, that I have a sandbox approach. I think this is great if you've never run a game before and you want to run
Sure.
a structured version. Go ahead, have fun with it. The part about the other supernatural creatures, I was surprised at how much they encourage crossover with the other games. When we started this sub-series, I had thought, New Rule of Darkness. They have the mechanical crossover, but not the narrative. I was very wrong, at least for Changeling, because throughout the entire book, they are talking about how much crossover there should be with other supernaturals.
Yes. However, I am going to point out that we were in year 4 of the New World of Darkness by this point. So I think that probably played into it to some extent.
That would make sense. I think that incorporating other supernaturals is good, but I would be remiss if I did not make this observation at this point, that you should focus on your game line that you are running before anything else,
Yes.
especially if it's your first time running, especially if you have a new group. I'll be honest, a lot of the cool stories that you could tell with any of those examples, you could just make those hobgoblins or true fae or other changelings. If anybody is listening to this who gets really excited about doing crossovers, I encourage you, in the same way that when writing poetry, you're encouraged to follow a specific kind of structure to force yourself into a kind of creativity, do the same thing with Changeling. So if you think to yourself, wow, a vampire would be really fitting, then instead of busting out your Vampire the Requiem book, look at Changeling and ask yourself, how could I do a vampire in Changeling and make that what the players encounter?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's 100% yes.
Chronicle paths.
Chronicle paths. So after all of that, and that structural system takes up like 5 pages that I'm never going to get back. Chronicle Paths offers bonus XP ideas for individual character development as a way of working through that tension of changelings needing company versus changelings needing personal comfort. Or as the book puts it quite elegantly, they have dual natures that resonate with their ostracism from both the human and the fae. It's nice. So these Chronicle Path methods include character diaries, opportunities for the limelight, where the choices the character makes kind of display their inner self to a degree, solitaire vignettes, which are great for downtime, and storyteller character rivals that the individual character can kind of focus against. Again, all good strategies for any game to kind of make individual players feel engaged within the group. Interestingly, this was also the only point, I think, where Arcadia is referred to as the Jeweled Realm, and I liked that.
Oh, I did not notice that. That's interesting.
It just like popped up, and I was like, "Is that anywhere else?" And a Control F said no. So
Fascinating. The only thing I have to add to that is that if you're running a game online through Discord and you want to give players an opportunity to focus upon more personal stories that you're struggling to incorporate into the main session, creating a thread for a downtime scene is a perfect way of doing that.
see also our episodes on advanced storytelling techniques and online gaming for more.
Hmm.
We get this random section on romance after all that. Do all the check-ins with players. Please do all the check-ins. First about boundaries, then about individual like stuff people are into. Determine how much you want this to be on stage or involved in the overarching plot rather than as a background thing. Yeah. Have an upfront conversation.
I love romance in my games, romance, dating, flirting, intimacy, all of those things. But I also agree that you got to make sure that you're playing to people's comfort levels.
Yeah.
I also want to encourage you to keep in mind that sometimes people may surprise you. I have had players in my games who I thought would not be interested in romance or intimacy. And then the moment there was an opportunity for it, they dived head in.
Oh dear. Particularly in a game that leans so heavily on replicated trauma, romance is a delicate operation to consider. So, lastly, there are 7 chronicle ideas, which I don't want to spoil these, but I do have a favorite. Do you have a favorite?
Ooh, okay. Offhand, I don't have a favorite,
Okay.
but I want to say that most of these Chronicle ideas would work equally well for Changeling the Dreaming.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I'm just going to read my favorite one because they're short. Sorry for the spoiler. This one is The Dream Oracle. The most shameful of the changeling's secrets have become common knowledge, and the courts are in an uproar. The problem is that it's not just the normal court intrigue and rumor mongering that's to blame, it's a mortal writer whose inspirations come from her lucid dreams. The writer herself doesn't know that she's transcribing the sordid lives of changelings and creating a scandal among the local freehold. On the other hand, she's received no small amount of local acclaim, and it's only a matter of time before her dreams turn to novels find a national publisher. This would be a disaster for local changelings for the attention they'd incur from other lost and the ever searching true fae, but also for the sheer public embarrassment of it all. Which again feels very much like a dreaming story. So
I love that.
then we have fetches, and we've discussed them briefly already. But spoiler, this is another Changeling the Dreaming fans asked for it, so we'll give them a mini game that worked out situation.
I'm obligated at this point
Yes.
to mention that my handle Fetch comes from this specifically. When I ran Changeling the Lost for the first time, there was a in joke where I would change my Discord name to not a fetch. And then over a while, my players started just referring to me as Fetch, and I started to think of myself as Fetch. This was pre transition for me, but I came to like it
Oh.
so much and identify with it so wholly that when I did my legal name change, I made Fetch into my literal last name.
And that is a naming bunk to end all bunks.
Thank
But I
you.
mean, you know, taking a moniker from a role playing term, I have no idea what that would be like.
Mm, mm.
Can't imagine.
Someday I'll find out which one of the animals is your favorite for the puka. Someday you will tell me this.
Someday. So, as a reminder, fetches are simulacra left behind by the true Fae, built from the abductee's shadow and random hedge materials, given the abductee's form and life, which the fetch sometimes lives better than the human did. There is the section Building the Fetch. It gives the important note that all changelings had one at some point, even if they don't now, with the possible exception, as outlined on the next page, of a human who wandered into the hedge and was captured. So maybe the Fae didn't go looking for them and leave a replacement. The fetch is indistinguishable from humanity, but might have little variations of behavior pointing to the nature of their creator, who might not be the abductor from among the gentry, but some envoy that they assigned to the task of creating the fetch. The fetch need not resemble exactly the original human or the changeling they've become. Also important. There are 5 key questions listed here that are helpful for establishing the dynamic a fetch has with mortals. So, How much does the fetch know about itself? How human is the fetch? How entrenched is the fetch in the mortal world? Is the fetch still around? And did the mortal's family ever suspect? So all of that, before you plot the dynamics of the fetch with respect to their changeling, this is all helpful material to kind of get a sense of who they are.
I think it's great they put this in here because it makes fetches more than just a speed bump for the changelings to deal with.
Right.
And if you do a great job with it, then you can tell wonderful conflicted stories where the players might ask themselves, do I want to disrupt this character's life?
Yeah.
This feels like a person.
Have you ever wanted to run a full fetch game where all the players are playing fetches? I would love to run that.
It's something they mention in at least one of the books, and it is a tempting story. It's a great premise for a Blue Book Chronicles of Darkness story.
Filing away for future someday when I have time. There's a whole stack of things. Anyway, we get more character creation stuff. Mechanically, the fetch is likely to have similar attributes and innate merits as their original human, but anything that evolves over time, such as skills, might be wildly different because they've been living their own life. From the point of view of the fetch, though, their changeling's return might spark them to move in new directions for reasons they can't pinpoint. They just have this sense that something in their situation has changed because the changeling has come back, and they're like, I'm in danger. I need to learn firearms. And I love that.
I love that too.
Yeah. I also really like the note that the virtue and vice offer opportunities to show either different expressions of the same virtue and vice if you pick the same ones as the changeling has, or if you pick different ones, very directly showing the contrast in who they are as people, the relationship between the fetch's nature and the changelings. I think that is a subtle way of handling that.
It's also a good callback to an earlier part in the book where they, during character creation, they mention that you make a virtue and vice, you're changing just like anything else, but they might be weird.
Yeah. Food for thought. The mechanical changes are in the templating step 5. So fetches don't have contracts or pledges, they don't have a seeming, they don't start with any kind of court status or goodwill, although they might acquire it if they make contact with a court. They can't get mental, they don't have clarity, they just have morality like a mortal. They start with weird 1, but they always end up matching their changeling's level of weird, which is a nice touch. And they have the attuned to the weird echo, which we'll get to in a moment. I sense you have a comment.
Yes. So my comment is on that picture on page 256, which shows a changeling having broken into the home of their fetch and killing them. And it is a gruesome and disturbing display. My next comment was honestly going to be launching into the magic of the fetch, which are the echoes, and also a side thought that if their weird can increase that high, I guess that means that fetches can eventually develop superhuman levels of attributes.
Absolutely. If their changeling does.
Yep. Fetches can become super dangerous if your changing becomes dangerous.
Yeah. There is also a sample build of Jack Tallow's fetch in the mix here, I should point out. But yeah, the echoes, they're just these one-off powers that do interesting things. Ones I wanted to call out include match, where you kind of intuit the mindset of your associated changeling. Conflicts or combats, they match your initiative. There's mimic contract when they're near their changeling, and shadow step to teleport when they hit weird 3. I am confused how and when you actually buy these, because I don't think that's spelled out anywhere.
Oh, do they not? They gain additional echoes as their weird increases, so maybe it's
I guess
one.
you just pick one. Yeah.
There's 3 I want to call out. I'll make them quick. One is normalcy is one I use all the time in my Changing the Lost games because I tend to think of my fetches as looking very human, and even changelings have a hard time seeing through it. 2, Call the Fae, which is a terrifying thing they can pick up at Weird 5 that summons the true Fae to you. My goodness. And finally, the creepy one of Feast of Shadows, where an injured fetch can consume the shadows of living beings in order to heal itself. Super disturbing.
I can't remember actually if this is in the next section is storytelling the fetch, and now I'm trying to remember if it's in here. But something like Feast of Shadows, if the fetch thinks of itself as human and starts doing that, what kind of mental break must they have? You know,
Oh,
that's something worth
gonna
exploring.
that's gonna mess them up, no doubt.
Yeah. But anyway, the storytelling options that are given here are the fetch as the adversary, whether through violence, through social encounters, or otherwise. Fetch as other half. The example that Pete gave in his interview, that's going to be like my go-to example of how to run that kind of thing. But there's also this idea of reincorporating them, which is very Wizard of Earthsea. I don't know if you've read Wizard of Earthsea, but
Not yet, I really want to.
well, there's a very reincorporating the fetch kind of plotline. Spoiler.
Haven't I have not done the reincorporating the fetch yet, but that is something I think would be a great plot beat.
Yeah. And then fetch as myth, where it's like, oh, maybe they don't really exist. But I feel like that immediately undercuts the theme that they're trying to build in by saying every changeling has or had a fetch. So I think I would probably just skip that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's something the changeling believes that is not actually true. Anyway, fetches. Another mini game. This is the third mini game, which I would happily play. So then, there's a bunch of other antagonists who perhaps have a less complicated relationship with an individual changeling. We have the Lost themselves, which are subdivided into madmen who do not return through the hedge with their sanity intact, loyalists who serve the gentry whether they know it or not, militia who zealously believe in conquering Fae for themselves, bridge burners who think cutting off all access to the Fae is their best protection, and the soulless who come back psychopaths. There's this sidebar on page 260 about insanity. I don't know that this really helps the case. I guess it's moving away from the Victorian fascination with madness that we just had a few sections ago, but it also is like, oh, consider reading the DSM as background. I'm like,
I think that all of the examples are great to read through. They oftentimes portray very sympathetic looks at these characters. Except for one in particular, that the soulless example, the serial killer, whose quote
yeah,
is game over. This person is so bad, I kind of feel like, why do we need both the madmen and the soulless when we have the soulless that just seem kind of like a stronger concept? This is a person who was tormented by the Fae and then came back. The Fae released him being like, this is going to be great. I've destroyed this dude's life. And then the Fae watched in shock as their victim just walked in, killed their fetch, stepped back into their shoes, and has begun a serial killer spree. And the Fae is like, weird. Don't know why that happened, but I'm going to keep watching this.
that one was not my favorite, I will say. I liked Paxton, the loyalist, because she's stuck in a morally complex dilemma.
Yeah.
I like morally complex dilemmas. I think they're great.
Or Paxton.
See, I want to sit back and watch how Paxton gets out of her situation. That's what I want to do.
We promised ourselves we wouldn't get too deep into it. Let's go to mortals.
Mortals. So these are mortals who are aware of the existence of the lost, such as the Oathbound Protector, who's a cop who accidentally killed with iron a Fae chasing a changeling, so now he's her unaging protector.
Importantly, he has no idea that he does not have the enchanted thing, so he doesn't understand what he's doing. He just knows that he's helping something weird.
And it's given him some kind of bennies. And then we get the Fae Struck, who become obsessed with all things Fae and are therefore easily manipulatable and often also dysfunctional. The opening to the Fae Struck section, I sort of wonder if it was like a little bit of a dig at dreaming players. Just the line, a Fae groupie may have grown up feeling like an outsider to human society, longing for some explanation for this alienation. And I think back to the discussions we've had about dreaming as queer metaphor for closeted teens. Like, that was really important to me. And I feel like, okay, well, I feel a little bit on the ropes after reading this, but okay.
My impression of the Fae Struck is that it's just a touch mean-spirited. It feels like it is making a little bit of fun of people who are really into the Fae stuff, while it has some good stuff. The example is the Devoted Groupie. Their picture is amazing. It's this person dressed in an elaborate Victorian-looking costume. The concept is that he's some rich kid who's hanging out with the Fae and has a lot of money and is willing to do anything for them. So on one hand, they're like, great. On the other hand, he thinks he can become Fae, but he doesn't really get what that is. And he's on the verge of doing something very stupid in order to become more like them.
Yep. Speaking of the Fae, the next category we get are the Banished, the Fae cast out of Arcadia, which is a very rare punishment, but I like the note that it's usually on the basis not of some heinous act, but on a technicality breach of a contract. It's like, you violated Clause 6, subsection B. All the murders you committed, those don't matter. It's 6B that we're going to kick you to Earth for.
There's a lot of examples of the Fae messing around with contracts and doing things that they think they can get away with. And when those go wrong, I think that leads to banishment.
Yes. And they're weaker than the true Fae in Arcadia, but still quite dangerous and more powerful than the changelings they sometimes impersonate.
I gotta note that their example is one who has worked her way into a local freehold, and to my surprise, she has gained 4 dots of the Winter Court mantle. I did not think that would be allowed narratively, much less mechanically.
I mean, she strikes me as almost more Dark Ages style Winter Court because she's also a serial killer. So, yeah.
I do wish they went a step further and said that. So they say here that one other thing that can lead them into the mortal life is that they become enthralled with one particular emotion, like revenge,
Yeah.
and it obsesses them so much that they wind up getting stuck in the mortal world, even though they can't really understand the mortal world. I love the idea of maybe what if the Fae could become an actual human, but they don't discuss that being possible here, and we can talk about that more with Autumn Nightmares, which discusses the Banished in more detail.
And if they believe it's possible, that's still story-worthy.
That's such a good story writing.
Hobgoblins. So these are hedge creatures. They might have been crafted by the Fae. They might be spontaneous manifestations of the hedge itself. Who knows? But they are regardless potential threats from the briar wolves to the tricksy and faceless Nopperabo of Japanese mythology.
They've got a couple of great pictures to accompany them.
Yeah, especially the latter. And then lastly, the true Fae, who rarely intrude into the mortal world, but the example par excellence is the huntsman leading the wild hunt. Much more robust in 2nd edition core, but still notable here. And dang, those stats. All the stats.
You say they have all the stats, but I also think to myself,
you could take him.
You know, he doesn't have anything above like a 6. Yeah, he's got a bow that does 4 lethal damage and 16 dice, which is a lot, but he also only has 5 defense and 12 health. You take a few dots of a stone contract and spend some points on glamour.
I'm going to point out, this is probably a typo, but he has Vainglory 6. So I don't know what that can do, and I don't want to find out.
I wondered about that. They don't think they ever talk about it elsewhere, so yeah, I think it's a typo. We should mention that they have immortal flesh, which means they take only bashing damage from most things that would do lethal, and they do not take bashing damage from anything at all. And their benefits from virtue and vice are reversed. This dude has a lot of contracts and would be dangerous, but I've honestly been a little bit underwhelmed with how dangerous the true Fae are mechanically after all of the buildup, and I just wish there was more to emphasize how you do make them a threat.
Oh, well, see, I also see him as, like, the weakest of the true Fae. And particularly weak because he's in the real world. Those are the proper antagonists. But lastly, as a less overtly antagonistic thing, we have goblin markets. The trading spaces on the edge of freeholds where you can get whatever. Disclosure, I love these. I always try to incorporate goblin markets. Even in games that aren't Changeling, I try to get a goblin market in there.
Me too. I have one in my campaign. It is called GobCon, and it is done like a comic book / anime convention.
Beautiful.
But they sell a wide variety of things there.
I like the way this section is divided up. There's the when and where, which talks about how the goblin markets seem to never have existed except when they do, under specific conditions. The how and why section shows how accessing them can be its own challenge, especially if you have to enter the hedge to do it, and suggests that their reason for being might be something more sinister than just a need for commerce made manifest. And the Who and What notes that only pledged merchants may actually sell at market, with wares including goblin fruits, tokens, goblin contracts, skill tutoring, mortal slaves, and esoterica. The cost of these items is rather unpredictable, but in game terms, it's glamour for one-use items, XP for longer-term stuff. There's also a note about dangerous bargains where you can trade things like memory or sanity. Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in here about the sheer audacity of what you can buy and sell, and that only becomes bigger as the game line goes on. In my own game, you can buy and sell pretty much anything you want, but I oftentimes make it so that something that a character really wants, if it's a major story beat, is more expensive to purchase. I do think it's also important to note that not everything you buy and sell is good or fair. For example,
No.
for mortal slaves, not great. And also, the hobgoblins can try to sell you cursed items and leave out the bit that it's cursed.
Yes. There will be a lot more to say on all of this, I think, when we get to the supplement of the same name, which is a great supplement. The book also suggests that the markets are useful to show the madness of dreams because they operate under their own logic, or paranoia on the part of changelings because they suspect the true fae are pulling the strings of the merchants. But also, as you're pointing out, it's just a utilitarian thing in your game. Your character needs random weird object X, go to the goblin market. You don't really need the story hooks that are provided here, but here they are. You can have it as a catalyst for MacGuffin quest, have liberating the humans as a story, help an ally get out of a bargain with a merchant, or have the market be a trap to be escaped. All well and good, but also fine to just have it as your local Fey goods depot. And that's it.
That's it. We've made it through.
So, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad chapter. It sometimes gets lost in its own cul-de-sacs, but it's not bad. I don't know. I didn't find the ST advice all that helpful, but I'm also not a new storyteller. The antagonists were a mixed bag, sometimes with a lot more attention on the sample characters than on how to create robust characterizations for your own characters. Goblin markets are fun, albeit not described enough for all their potentials. The fetch section was really the highlight for me because it was such a great structure for building out that narrative. I mean, it's the other side of what's central to Lost. You can connect to the game's themes from the opposite direction, and I really like that they developed it enough to do that.
I agree. One of my issues with changing the Lost is that a lot of the stuff can be esoteric and really begs for more explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all well and good to say that the true Fae are inscrutable, but how do you actually roleplay something like that? I
Yeah.
think that the book gives us enough information to work with, but you will need to be, in some occasions, ready to come up with your own answers to things, and that may be true even in later books, like especially Goblin Markets. I don't think there's any book that will ever just outright say, here is the absolute truth about Goblin Markets and everything that goes on, but they will give you a lot of tools to build around it.
Yeah. And you could do that, honestly. There could be an entire Oniromancy book. There could be an entire Fetches book. There could be an entire Pledges book. Even these systems that are so heavily developed are in many ways still just scratching the surface of what you could get into. But for the time being, I think that's a wrap for now.
Yes.
Next time, entitlements and Miami, and I think there's something else, and listener questions.
Yes, listener questions. That'll be great. I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to digging into some of those. We've had some fun ones on the Discord.
And speaking of Discord, if you would like to send questions or otherwise get in touch with us, stop by discord.me/CTP and chat with our community. You can also send an email to podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. We're on both Facebook and YouTube under Changeling the Podcast. You can visit us on Mastodon at changelingpod@dice.camp, and we have a Patreon at Changeling the Podcast. Links to all of these will be in the show notes to this episode, along with whatever other sundries we can come up with. So, I guess until next time, I've been Pooka.
And I have been Fetch.
and we look forward to offending you in the future. Good night and good luck.
Despite the extreme density of this text, there's still plenty of material that didn't make the cut for the first edition corebook, such as the other potential forms of dream manipulation that get the coveted oniro prefix. These include oniroectomy, the surgical removal of dreams from a dreamer, oniritis, causing dreams to become red and puffy around the edges, onirozominta, the granting of a fresh minty scent to idle fantasies, and onirambronomomania, the instilling of a frantic obsession with names raining from the sky inside a dream. Although these never made it into the books, we encourage would-be authors to explore such possibilities on the Storyteller's Vault, or just in conversation on our Discord. And if you'd like us to continue floating ideas like this, we'd be grateful for your support by leaving a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or by signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Esteemed patrons we'd like to salute include Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Hugo the Bog Person, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raskaboos, Sandchigger, Sija, and Simon Strand. Many thanks to them. Everyone else, we wish you fruitful shopping at the goblin markets. May your path remain unbesmirched by huntsmen, and we urge you as ever to keep on dreaming.